3D buffers are an idea to move on from a traditional field edge buffer. So that if that fence post was, for example, the stream, then you might find 2 or 3 meters were given up from the field for a buffer of some description. So it's grass, it's vegetation, and it's acting as a filter strip, a narrow filter strip that does some kind of job at the edge of the field in minimising surface runoff and sediment losses. But it lacks a lot of function. So for example, it can be completely overwhelmed by floods and faster runoff that just crosses it, or it can have drainage ditches that go underneath it. So the 3D buffers are about the functions that you get with structure all the way from deep rooting vegetation to a sculptured ground surface that might retain water, all the way up to the canopy of trees, and the functions are to stop aerial pathways, to stop surface pathways, and to try and mitigate below ground pathways, even fast ones like soil drains. Benefits of 3D buffers can be many, and the idea actually with them is to maximise the multiple benefits. So of course that has a strong connection to the place where they're applied. So here in an arable system, you might expect that a sandier soil has nitrate problems, so a bit of planning will tell you what the issues are, looking at water quality, looking at problems on the field like erosion, and then you try and match the measures and the way they function and their benefits to what you see on the ground. We can do a little bit of recharge of lost water that goes quickly out the system during floods into groundwater reserves again. We do water quality. So water quality is about minimising nutrients lost to the freshwater environment, but also some agrochemicals, and we're doing habitat. So the idea is to do all three together, and they're not mutually exclusive in any way. So when you're planning and locating 3D buffer measures, so there can be a whole range of measures. I mean, we're here looking at a packaged, more sort of deluxe set of things that have gone into quite a robust measure for a problematic situation. But they can be as simple as planting riparian woodland, or they can be a bund or a sediment trap on the ground, or they can be something that breaks a soil pathway. So you need to know where the pathways are. That's a really key thing, and you can use resources such as maps and topography, even LiDAR, topographic data from satellites for planning those. A good walkover is definitely a strong point, and incorporating especially the local knowledge of the landowner, who would be able to tell you and confirm from your desk data where some of the pathways were, where he's seen erosion over different years, different crop types, and where water resides over wet periods such as winter, or ponds against the side of the streams. From this field edge we've got 3 zones. We've got this narrow zone of grass that is the first wave of infiltration, but then we've got a linear ditch. It runs perpendicular to the field, the slope of erosion, so that's acting as several functions. First of all, when we dug that ditch, it cut off any field drains that were there, and then secondly, it acts as a bit of a erosion trap, so any sediment coming down in runoff from the field is trapped in there. And then so that's zone 1. Zone 2 is the ditch, and then the third zone we call a bioactive root zone, and it's more or less the rooting area of some trees that have been planted, and that's that's acting as a carbon pump, bringing down carbon from the atmosphere and then enlivening some natural soil cleaning processes like microbes. In the case here, it's willows.
What is a 3D buffer? Well, as Marc earlier said, it's about getting structure below and above the ground. But at this site, which we're at here today, is we have the 3D element above the ground is this raised bund topography landscape rather than tree species. So what we're doing here is raising the topography of the land perpendicular to the flow pathway to capture highly erosive flows during the 10 storm events, bringing all this rich sediment topsoil lost from the field to this one point and collecting it in this opportunistic site. So the first thing we can do is to manage the soil better to make sure it doesn't erode in the first place, and that's certainly what we're doing here, good soil management practices. But with climate change and more eroding events, we're going to see more mobilization of soil lost from the landscape to this point here. And you can see the amount of soil that's being captured here at this one point. And where we're standing here is actually, so this is just through the result of a 20 centimetre high raise in topography at the edge of the field, allowing us to collect all the sediment. And this is now full. Two options here: you could replow this back in or take it out and spread it back onto the field. This is filled with nutrients, good value, good topsoil. The second aspect is by creating a raised bund, we're creating capacity to store flood water in times of flood events. So what we have here is actually a temporary storage area. It will disconnect extreme events, extreme rainfall, and store the water for approximately a day maximum. Here we are on Glensock Farm in Aberdeenshire, and you're now in the upland environment of Scotland. So what we see behind us is the typical upland landscape, moorland, and here we're looking at a upland riparian system. The uplands are a key part of Scotland which produce a lot of water and runoff. There's lots of rainfall in the uplands, so these are areas that generate a lot of flood producing water. So what we're trying to do here is try and slow down and store that water temporarily during flood events and hold it for longer to try and improve low flows as well. So the key aspect of this environment is, for the 3D buffers, is we're trying to introduce tree species here, riparian planting, to increase roughness of the riparian corridor. But trees take time to establish. So in the meantime, before the trees can grow, we've installed these leaky barrier type approaches across the stream and through the floodplain area here. Now generally these leaky barriers are installed within the stream to break down the velocity of the flow and have some in-channel storage. But what we want to do here is push the flow of the water from the stream into the floodplain and use the floodplain more effectively to increase the amount of water we can store in times of floods on the floodplain.
So generally what we're trying to do here is encourage whole catchment management, putting things in the right places, mixing the uplands with the lowlands, but being very place specific with what can be considered a menu of measures.
I guess it's down to the right measure in the right place concept. So yep. Thinking about your place for your measure. So here we are in the uplands, thinking about this being a great place, less intense agriculture, to do more water storage type measures and make more use of the land available here. But what we saw in Balrudry is land's a bit more tight, a bit more precious, but you can be strategic with the right measure in the right place and have a lot of good effectiveness.
People can opt for a range of more different designs, isn't it, than a traditional buffer, which is often not an effective land take.
It doesn't have to be about creating new measures, it's about maybe as well redesigning. The innovation is redesigning and reassessing what we have existing.
We're not entirely on a level playing field, a static playing field, are we, at the minute? Because things are changing. More frequent storms and more sharp storms in summer, soil loss and nutrient loss and the problems that brings. So we need to act, but we need people to see what the possibilities are, and they're not that far from using aspects of nature.